Now, this series is the first week of our series, Drawing Board, Redesigning Your Faith. And this series was inspired by a one group I led called the Questions and Doubts One Group. And on the first week, everybody submitted a question on an index card, like you have the opportunity to do for Doubt Day. And it can be a question that is anonymous. You don't have to write your name. If you don't care to be anonymous, you can email that question to doubtday.com. But that's the index card that I referred to, that I left over. Could you pull out your index card? And on September 28th, we're going to have Doubt Day. And what we're going to do is, on that day, I'm going to address as many questions as I can, questions and doubts that you might have. And so this week and in the coming weeks, I encourage you to write down whatever. You can make a doubt statement. You can say, this is a time for honesty, just like that one group that I led. I doubt blank. And you can just fill it in. Whatever it is, you have complete permission to be honest about your doubt. You could also put it in the form of a question. You could say, instead of saying, I doubt, you could just say, what about this? It could be any matter of faith. It could be anything about the Bible. Or questions about faith, spirituality at all. And if you write on the index card, you can drop it in the offering container on the way out. If you want to email, you use doubtday@onechurch.com. But I started that one group to collect those questions, and throughout the weeks we address those questions and discuss them in the group. And it was a 12-week group, and near the end, somebody said to me, she used this word. She said, I've deconstructed my faith. And I'm at kind of the place where I was like, now what? I know what I don't believe. I know what I was taught in church growing up. I know all the answers that there are, but I don't know what to believe now. And I don't want to be known for what I'm against, but I want to be known for what I'm for. And I said, you just inspired a sermon series. And she certainly did. And so this series, Drawing Board, is about rebuilding, reconstructing our faith. We have many different people here who are in different places in our journey with these questions and doubts. And they can come from purely intellectual reasons, where you just have intellectual questions about these things. It could come from a church conflict and the kind of situation that we were just talking about. Maybe you carry pain and questions and doubts because of things like that. But whatever it is, we're at the place where it's time to rebuild our faith. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to be tackling some specific questions, and on Doubt Day, really specific questions and doubts that I'm asking you to provide. But today, we're looking at the big picture of what it means to at least start from square one, if you've deconstructed your faith, to reconstruct what it is you believe. So we're not getting into so many specific questions today, but we're going to look at the big picture. I don't know if you saw an article this week. Did anybody see the article about CVS no longer carrying tobacco products? A few? Okay. So when I read that article, the thought occurred to me, I think it's admirable that CVS is no longer going to be, selling cigarettes. And I don't condemn people who smoke. I believe in the old preacher line, cigarettes won't send you to hell, but they'll make you smell like you've been there. That's what I hold to. So I don't mean this to condemn folks, but what's admirable that they don't want to sell tobacco products. And then this thought occurred to me. Isn't it kind of odd that a pharmacy, like a health pharmacy, would ever sell tobacco products? You know what I mean? It was one of those things where we progress over time, I believe, and so someday a pharmacy sold cigarettes? Like, how does that make sense exactly? Like, are they trying to create their own business? Like, you make people sick and then you sell them the medicine to heal them. It reminded me of a place, there's a strip mall near where Hannah and I used to live. There's a little shopping plaza that had a very unique yet brilliant collection of stores, and I picked up a shirt from the cleaners one day, and I noticed a new store that had gone into the strip mall. Here it is. Now look through the window. You see the glare on the window. Can you tell what's inside there? Those are wooden caskets in a strip mall. So in this particular strip mall, you could go window shopping for a casket. I've never seen anything like this before, but you want to hear the name of it? It's called the Pine Box Agency in a strip mall. So now here are all the stores in this strip mall, going from like left to right. Dry cleaners, Chinese restaurant, bar, cigarette shop, casket store. So it was like the progression of an unhealthy lifestyle. You know what I mean? Just like walking down the sidewalk, like you can go get your fried food, you can get some cigs, and then some drinks, get your shirt pressed, and go pick out a casket right there. Just be ready for your funeral. Right, one-stop shopping in this plaza. I thought this plaza owner is creating his own business. This is a brilliant man. I don't think that's what CVS wants to do. And as I saw that article, I thought, well, doesn't it just make sense that a health store like CVS would not want to carry tobacco products? Well, doesn't it just make sense? So if you're at the place where you have lots of questions and doubts, and you're asking yourself, what should I really believe? What is true in this life? And again, maybe they come from intellectual questions, maybe they come from a place of pain. But if you're there, doesn't it make sense to start where Jesus starts? If we want to follow Jesus, if we want to model our lives after him, doesn't it make sense to start where Jesus starts? I want to read a scripture passage to you from Matthew chapter 9. It'll be on the screen if you have a Bible with you, Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13. In your worship folder, there's a place to take sermon notes if you would like to do that. And we're going to see a verse that Jesus quotes in this passage. That is the verse from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the only Bible Jesus had. This is the verse he quotes most often in the Gospels. That's a big deal, isn't it? This is the verse he quotes most often. We're going to read that and see what it could tell us about where Jesus starts in his faith, so to speak. So Matthew 9, 9 through 13. As Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners, you feel bad for IRS agents who read the Gospels. Many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, we're going to talk about Pharisees. When the Pharisees saw that Jesus was eating with tax collectors and sinners, they asked his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Verse 12. On hearing this, Jesus said, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick." And his meaning's clear there. I'm hanging out with people who need help and who know it. Verse 13, here it is. "But go and learn what this means." Here's the quote. "I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but the sinners." Now, in fairness to IRS agents, quickly, tax collectors in the Roman world were viewed as sellouts because the Romans occupied Palestine, what is now Israel, where Jesus lived, and so they were considered to be just the cast-outs of society. But Jesus identified with people who didn't fit in a religious setting. They weren't church rats. These are folks who had plenty of questions and doubts and plenty of pain inflicted upon them by religious people. They had been hurt by religious people in the past. And those are the people that Jesus went to hang out with. And this quotation, "I desire mercy, not sacrifice," comes from the Old Testament prophet Hosea. In Hosea chapter 6, verse 6, God speaks through the prophet Hosea, and the meaning is very clear there as well. That in ancient religion, often animal sacrifice was practiced. And that was how people believed they pleased God. You would make an animal sacrifice offering to God, and God, through the prophet Hosea, says, I've seen all the religious rituals, and I've seen, the, so to speak, churchy way of doing things, and I've seen it all, and I'll tell you what, God says, what I desire from you is mercy, not sacrifice. I don't want I'm not pleased by the religious rituals and going through the motion of religion. What I want from you is mercy. And it's an amazing word, mercy, throughout the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. It's the Hebrew word hesed, and it'll be on the screen, hesed. Can you say, you actually have to kind of do a guttural pronunciation, chesed. Can you do that? Chesed. You don't want to project anything onto the person in front of you, so chesed, though, it requires that pronunciation. Chesed is an amazingly beautiful word. It can mean mercy, but it also means loving kindness. It can also mean faithful love. It means love that doesn't give up. It can mean unrelenting love. I mean, wow, what a beautiful word. Hesed. When Jesus says, I desire mercy, what he's really saying, God desires hesed from you. Not religious rituals and not going through the motions, but God desires mercy. Here's how you please God. Here's how you make God happy. If you want to live by mercy and loving kindness and faithful love. Okay, so the Pharisees are the people who confronted Jesus in this passage. So we need to spend a couple of minutes talking about Pharisees. There were two famous rabbis who just predated Jesus. And again, Jesus lived in Palestine, what is now Israel. And Christians believe in the pre-incarnate Christ. As Christian theology, we believe that Jesus has always existed co-equally, co-eternally with God the Father. So we believe in the pre-incarnate Christ. But the earthly Jesus, the Jesus who walked around the Sea of Galilee and wore a robe and is often depicted now in Western culture as a guy who looks blonde and blue-eyed and Swedish, wearing a bathrobe. But that's probably not what he looked like. That Jesus was a first-century Palestinian Jew. Jesus was an observant Jew. He taught in the style of other rabbis at the time. And he told parables, and the content was different, but the style of parable was actually found in the teaching of other rabbis. Can I just take a little quiz? How many of you are aware of that Jesus taught in the style of other rabbis? A few, okay. And so this might be kind of new information to some folks, and sometimes people feel like it diminishes Jesus to talk about the culture that Jesus came from. That's not true. That's not true. We believe in the pre-incarnate Christ, but Jesus lived in a particular time and place in history. And to understand what Jesus would base his faith on, so to speak, we need to understand the time in which he lived. So, we have these two famous rabbis. Their names were Hillel and Shammai. And Jesus was just a boy when Hillel passed away. Shammai lived longer than Hillel. Shammai was the strict, rigid, dogmatic rabbi, and Hillel was the more flexible, lenient, open rabbi. And of course, which one would you rather hang out with? So all of modern Judaism is based on Hillel, Rabbi Hillel. He's a famous rabbi in Jewish history. Well, before Jesus was born, there was a debate between these two famous rabbis that just kept going on and on and on and on. And they were always kind of arguing back and forth. And you had the followers of Shammai and you had the followers of Hillel. And the followers of Shammai were called Shammite Pharisees. The followers of Hillel were called Hillelite Pharisees. Now notice both are called Pharisees. But they followed very different rabbis. And to give you an example, there's a story that illustrates this perfectly. A Gentile approached Shammai, who was interested in converting to the Jewish faith. What do you think Shammai did? Shammai refused to talk to him because Shammai refused to talk to Gentiles. He believed in a purity of religion. He was the stricter rabbi. Now, in fairness to Shammai, he also had a very strict view on divorce. In this day, women had no rights. And Shammai would say, a man, you should not divorce your wife, for some flippant reason. A wife could not divorce her husband in this society. So Shammai would say, men, be faithful to your wife. Hillel, on the other hand, when a Gentile approached him, the Gentile said to Hillel, Rabbi Hillel, can you tell me the greatest commandment while standing on one foot? In other words, keep it short. Like say it before you fall over. And he said, Rabbi, what's the greatest commandment? And Hillel stood on one foot. And this is what Hillel said. What you hate, don't do to other people. That is the whole of Torah, which means Jewish law. The rest is commentary. Go and study it. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Does anybody recognize? That kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? And so Hillel was a famous rabbi, in contrast to Shammai, though. The lenient, Hillel said if a man wanted to divorce his wife, he could do so for any and every reason. If a wife burned her food, or burned the food, her husband could divorce her. So we had these contrasting debates between the strict, dogmatic Shammai and the lenient, flexible Hillel. Now, some people who love Jesus and want to follow Jesus might feel threatened by the idea that a rabbi said something that sounds similar to what we would call the golden rule, correct? In the golden rule, Matthew 7:12, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, that sounds a little bit different than what Hillel said. And actually, in Leviticus, the Old Testament that predates the earthly Jesus by hundreds of years, Leviticus says, love your neighbor as yourself. So that general concept had been around. Confucius taught that, the Buddha taught that, and so that general concept had been there. But Jesus was the first person to put the golden rule in its positive, proactive form. Not just don't do to other people what you don't want them to do to you, but do to others what you would like for them to do to you. It is a fact of history that, according to the best records we have, Jesus was the first person to put the golden rule in its positive, proactive, and universal form. And so I told you a little bit about my story, my journey of faith. About 10 years ago or so, I started questioning the faith that I had been raised with. And it was a scary, emotional time for me. And there were times when I was even angry because I felt lied to by some of the people who had taught me to believe certain things. And I can just kind of remember how the questions just piled, one after the other, kind of on a list of all these questions that I had. And I went through those questions, and it was a long, painful journey, probably a couple of years. And during that time, though, I remember this. I had serious doubts about metaphysical realities. Like, does God really exist? Is there really a God? I had serious doubts about metaphysical, heaven and hell, and all kinds of things, metaphysical things. And I was searching for answers, and I couldn't find the answers the way I was taught that I could find them. And I remember this, though. I remember thinking, and at this time I knew Jesus was the first person in history to state the golden rule in its positive, proactive form. That has now become the ground of all ethics. Even around the world, I mean, regardless of religion, people are going to say, well, if you want to live a good life, that's how you should live. Are you with me, correct? With me? People just kind of say that. No, all over the world, well, you just kind of treat other people the way you want to be treated. That statement, in its positive, proactive form, comes from Jesus. And that's kind of a big deal. Even in the questioning, for me, I had all kinds of uncertainty about metaphysical things, but I knew, well, that's a big deal. That comes from Jesus, and it's affected countless lives. And so I was talking with a couple recently, and I know many couples like this, actually, and they were talking about how the wife was raised in a kind of a Shammai-like church. And it was very strict and rigid, and you had everything, all figured out, all the T's crossed, all the I's dotted. I usually get that messed up, I's crossed and T's dotted. That's usually what I say. But it was that kind of a church, and her husband does not really share the same kind of certainty that she does about her faith. And she was raised in a church that taught, if your husband has not confessed Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, he's gone. He's off the list, He's not getting into the club. He's not on the list, in the rope line in heaven, and you shouldn't be with him. If you've heard the phrase unequally yoked, some of you have heard that, but she fell in love with him. And so now she loves this man who doesn't share the same certainty she feels about all these metaphysical realities. He has lots of questions and doubts. And so it was great that they opened up to me, bless you, that they opened up to me and were willing to talk to me about it. And here's what I responded to them. I looked at him, and I said, hey man, and I knew the answer before I asked it. I said, do you believe that doing unto others as you would have them do unto you is a good way to live? He's like, yeah, of course. And I believe him. And I said, well, the two of you share the core teaching of Jesus in common. And they're married now. And what if as a couple, if you want to build some kind of a faith, and individually too, what if that would be a great starting place? And I know that's a gray area, and a lot of people might feel the unequally yoked thing and all that, but what if that would be a great starting place? If you wanted to rebuild your faith, that we can agree on this, and they could have an excellent marriage as a couple. Well, back to Hillel and Shammai. Like I said, both of their followers were called Pharisees. Hillel died before Jesus became a public figure. When Hillel died, Shammai became the leader of the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish ruling council. And the followers of Shammai, the Shammite Pharisees, became the dominant form of Jewish religion from that time until the Romans destroyed the Jerusalem temple in 70 AD. So for almost all of Jesus' life, and then for decades after Jesus, including the writing of most of the New Testament, the Shammite Pharisees were the ones who were ruling the religion of the day. So when you read in the New Testament, anytime Jesus confronts the Pharisees, who you're really reading about are Shammite Pharisees. You're not really reading about the Hillelite Pharisees. Is that news to anybody that not all Pharisees were strict? But when you read in the New Testament about Pharisees, you're reading about Shammite Pharisees. And in debate after debate that Jesus had with the Shammite Pharisees, they would try to pose a legal question to him, like a detailed legal question, and try to trap him. And they were always concerned about the letter of the law and making sure that you have every belief that you have down pat, and every doctrine is in place, and every I dotted, there it is, every T crossed, and everything's in place. And Jesus, every single time, Jesus would always remind them of the big picture. Jesus would not get into the detailed, theological hair-splitting debates with the Shammite Pharisees, but every time Jesus would remind them of the big picture. And this verse that we read is the one he quotes most often. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. That religious rituals and having all your doctrine in place and all of your questions answered and everything strict and dogmatic and rigid, that is not really what God's looking for. What God's looking for is mercy, love, faithful love. The best illustration I've ever heard about this comes from an author named Rob Bell in a book called Velvet Elvis. And in this book, Velvet Elvis, he uses this illustration. He contrasts what he calls brickianity versus a trampoline. And he said there are so many people who are raised in churches, and maybe this was your church experience, where it's like all the different beliefs that they have are bricks, individual bricks, and they all make up a wall. All those bricks make up a wall. And often what you will see is folks will protect that wall very forcefully and maybe fearfully, because they have the assumption that if you remove one brick from the wall, that the whole wall comes crashing down. And so you'll hear people say maybe, well, if Noah's flood did not cover the entire earth, that means Jesus didn't raise from the dead, and I can't be a Christian. How many of you have heard kind of an argument like that? Raise your hand, please, if you would. Let's move a little bit. You've heard something like that. And so other people, well, if Jonah wasn't in the belly of the fish for 3 days, then I can't be a Christian. Have you encountered this? And it's like everything's just a little brick, and if you remove a few bricks, the whole thing comes crashing down. Rob Bell said, what if faith looks more like this? We're talking about the big picture, if you want to redesign your faith. What if faith looks more like this? He told a story about his sons jumping on a trampoline that somebody gave them, like the big 12-foot round backyard trampolines. And he said that his boys were small at the time, that they would jump on the trampoline together. And if his boy jumped alone, then he could attain a certain height. But if Rob said if he got on and jumped with him, they figured out that if they timed the jump just right and the timing was perfect and Jupiter was aligned with Mars, and that the boy would just fly way higher up in the air than he ever could on his own. And he said that was all a lot of fun until their mom came out and saw that happen one day. But he said the backyard trampoline gave him an insight. He was having fun jumping on the trampoline with his boys, laughing and giggling and sweating and falling down and all over the place. And he said, what if faith looks more like a trampoline? And all of the various beliefs, you've all seen these, you know what I'm talking about. These trampolines have all these springs around the edge and then the black canvas in the middle. He said, what if each belief is kind of like a spring? Not like a brick, not rigid and like a brick, but and it can crumble easily. But what if it's like a spring? And as you jump, that belief might get stretched a little bit. And then it might go back to normal. And then this over here, this spring might get stretched a little bit and then go back to normal. And what if just all the time, the beliefs that I have, what I believe about God and the Bible and all these religious questions that so many have and doubts that so many have, what if it's just kind of like this trampoline and the different springs are moving back and forth and in and out all the time? What if faith looked more like that? It's a perfect illustration. Apparently, Jesus likes jumping on trampolines. Because in his context, we have the pre-incarnate Christ, but in his earthly context, the earthly Jesus stood in the same line as the Old Testament prophets in Hosea and Rabbi Hillel. And then you have Jesus, where they were actually on the side of the flexible, lenient, open side of the rabbinical debate. Jesus had clashes with the Shammite Pharisees, those in society who had very, very rigid beliefs and everything had to be in place, brickianity in a sense. Jesus clashed with those four. It's an historical reality that in his context, Jesus was on the more flexible, open, lenient side. If you're keeping notes, maybe this is something to jot down. When the Pharisees wanted to confront Jesus, Jesus interpreted the law of God in light of the heart of God. Every single time. And the heart of God was mercy, love, faithful love. Every single time. When very religious people wanted to debate and hair split and make sure that everybody's doctrine is in place just like the bricks of a wall, every single time, Jesus pointed them back to the big picture. In the coming weeks, we're going to talk about what that means, specifically in a lot of these questions. But Jesus always interpreted the law of God in light of the heart of God. Okay, in closing, when I was growing up, one of the shows that was on regularly in my house was the Andy Griffith Show. And, of course, you had the gentle, kind, sweet Sheriff Andy Taylor, played by Andy Griffith. And he was just the kind of the ideal figure in Mayberry. But Andy wasn't the only cop in town, correct? There was another cop in town. And of course, that's Barney. Barney Fife was Sheriff Andy's deputy. And Barney was a by-the-book, rigid, brick wall kind of a lawman. And in the second season, there's this episode called Andy on Trial. And a millionaire wanted revenge on Andy because Andy gave him a speeding ticket. And so I looked up the synopsis. I don't know the episodes that well, by the way, to be able to tell you all. I know everything in detail about the Andy. No, not exactly. And so this millionaire is so mad at Andy that he sends the seductive blonde bombshell reporter to Mayberry to get the dirt on Andy. And, of course, she meets Barney. And she convinces Barney to just kind of spill the beans about all of Andy's, cutting of corners. One time Andy used the police car to take groceries to an older lady, and Barney couldn't use it to enforce the law, and they were attacking Andy. And Barney, he told all this. He said it. And so they sent a prosecuting attorney to Mayberry, and they put Andy on trial and put Barney on the witness stand. And to give insight into Barney's response, I'm going to show you a video here in a minute, but to give insight to Barney's response, there was this lesson that Andy was always trying to teach Barney, and Barney never quite got it. And that was, when you're a policeman, it's not always good to go by the book, but by the heart. But Barney was slow to get that message until he was put on the witness stand and forced to testify against Andy. So let's watch this 2-minute clip. Jesus interpreted God's law in light of God's heart every single time. And if you're at the place where you want to rebuild your faith, that's the big picture of what it looks like to follow Jesus. Jesus stood in line of the flexible, lenient, open stream of thinking in the religious debate, and he wanted to follow the heart of God every time. Will you pray with me?